Just the two of us.
Just
Okay.
the two.
Oh, we are live. Sorry about that, folks. What's going on? Welcome to week 17. This is episode 19 of the Next Man Up Injury Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Allen, and I'm joined by the magnificently talented, the good doctor himself, Dr. Erik Kreil. Welcome in, sir.
How do you do?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
It is a burden having all 5 squads in the championship round, but with great responsibility comes great power.
That too. Wow, shout out Spider-Man. It's championship week for most of us, some of us, not me. This is the first year, I think, since the first year I played fantasy football that I don't have at least one squad in a championship matchup, and I'm sad. I don't know what to do with this week. And we get a bonus week of the NFL season. So if you're in a crazy league that plays until the very last week of the year, then we'll have an injury report for you next week too. Do not worry. But this week is going to be a wild one, especially after last week. The NFL kind of got put in a blender. We had, I think, the most backups ever to start in 1 week in NFL history. I don't remember the exact number. I think it was like in the 50s, which is just wild. But, here we are. It's the world we live in right now. And as fantasy managers, we've got to adjust. So that's what we're here to do. I'm not going to beleaguer you with every single COVID listing and who's on and who's off. If we think of some that are relevant as we go along, we'll mention them. But for the most part, we're just going to bring you the injury news this week because that's what we do.
We do that
Sound
here
good to you?
sometimes.
We do. We do. All right. So for the sake of organization, we're going to start with QBs and go by position. So kicking it off, still on the injury report, we have Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. Erik, can you give us an update? What's going on with Lamar?
Yeah, I mean, this was the type of injury where, the range of outcomes was always somewhere between he could come back anywhere from the next game to, even missing a month. And in the NFL, the hard thing is that they give information so sparingly. And a lot of times this information comes from the coaches who, they really don't know a tendonitis from a shin splint. So, I think that the biggest piece of information that we've gathered so far is the reality that the club had to play their third string quarterback against a division rival in a game that would decide who sits atop the division going forward. So, that's a risk that you don't take unless you absolutely had to. And apparently, Lamar's ankle wasn't able to just be strapped up and put on the field just yet. So, I think that at this point, we know that the injury could be graded, somewhere around moderate, which, it may tell us that he might miss even another game. But I still consider him week to week. I think if we get the notification that he's suiting up this week and you're in the championship, you probably play him because of his ceiling, but you've got to know the risk of re-injury is higher than it was before this point. And he may not be as mobile as he was a few weeks ago. And realistically, that's why you drafted him, was for his running capabilities.
Yes, certainly. He's one of the most lethal dual threat quarterbacks in the league without question. I'm kind of treating him like I did Kyler Murray when he was out with his ankle injury. Obviously, he won't have the same rushing upside when he comes back, but there's a chance that he'll be back to his old self, and you can't bench that talent. If he's playing, you got to start Lamar. If he doesn't, next man up. Last week, Tyler Huntley was on the COVID protocol, so keep an eye on if he's off of it. I don't know if he has already been announced as out of the protocol yet. But Josh Johnson was the QB8 on the week for Baltimore last week. So regardless of who they end up rolling out, obviously it's a little matchup dependent, but they don't really have any terrible options at QB right now. On the flip side, a team that doesn't have very many great options at QB, Chicago, they've got injuries to Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. Do we have an update on either of them? Can we expect to see them this week? Erik, I don't know if you're on mute, but I cannot hear you.
Comms check.
There you are.
I'm still getting used to these Bluetooths.
You're good. You're just too fancy for me.
I was miming. No, I mean, between the two, Dalton and Fields, there's really no hard set update, which is tricky. I mean, the groin issue gives me the impression that that's not actually what was holding him back, but really the hand fracture is what stands out to me because even though it is his non-throwing hand, it really depends. Depending on which bone is broken and the severity of the fracture, you could be dealing with an area that actually has a really low blood supply, and that's going to delay its healing, and it's going to make the reality that any further injury could risk a much more severe impact on his career. So I think it's worth noting that when you look at the practice history, last week the Bears listed as Dalton as a full participant on last Thursday, but then they quickly downgraded him to did not practice and out finally on Saturday. So, frankly, if I was in charge, I would hold him out at least another week, because really there's no great way to protect your hand from impact while playing at the quarterback position. Justin Fields, I think that he's another tough one to judge because we just don't have the information needed to determine the severity. So I'd kind of gauge him similar to Lamar Jackson. I consider him week to week in my book. But again, even if he does play, he might not be the Konami code quarterback that you need in this championship game. So, if you have other options that have a higher floor, that might be your better bet because Fields might not give you the ceiling that the name alludes to.
Yeah, absolutely. As a rookie quarterback, he didn't come into the best situation in the world. And we're hoping he can turn it around next year and hopefully maybe get into a better system, but we won't get into that in Chicago. The next man up here, if neither of them can go, Nick Foles will most likely take the helm again. He was QB 12 last week, so it wasn't an awful streaming option if you were just absolutely strapped and have nobody else. If he's available on the waiver wire, he's worth a stash if you have the space on your bench. Over to Denver, Teddy Bridgewater a couple weeks ago suffered a nasty looking hit, was out, ended up being carted off the field. Very scary situation, but sounds like we've got some good news in Denver on his status.
Yeah, I mean, I do not think he will be playing this week. And I think that the tricky part is that the concussion injuries are filled with tons of vagaries. We just don't know when he'll be back. What we know is that concussions are a bruise to your brain tissue, and if he was sent to the hospital, then he was dealing with a more severe version of a concussion. So I think that a team with a record like the Broncos, if I were them, I wouldn't really be too hasty at sending out Teddy Bridgewater for 2 more games.
Yeah, not playing for too much anymore in Denver, at least this season. Be yeah, I don't feel like that would be a very good decision for anybody. We've talked about the next man up in Baltimore and in Chicago being okay streaming options. Somebody I'm not really looking at as a great streaming option is Drew Locke. Um, I will admit I was high on him coming out of college. I liked him at Mizzou, and he just hasn't really caught on despite being surrounded by talented options. So kind of a bummer to see that out of Drew Locke. Definitely not somebody I'm looking at streaming or picking up this week unless I'm just absolutely desperate at QB.
How would you rank Josh Johnson, Nick Foles, Drew Lock?
That is just a preposterous question.
There's only one right answer.
Probably in that order. I can see
Yeah.
an argument for Foles or Johnson, one ahead of the other, but I'm kind of going to base the argument off of the offense that they're in and say Johnson's going to be the top of my list if I've got to stream somebody.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that Johnson's Konami code upside just gives you higher ceiling.
Yeah, and I mean, most likely if you have him on your roster, it's because he was backing up Huntley, who was backing up Jackson. So it's kind of like you're just going to start whoever the healthy starting quarterback is in Baltimore in that situation. But either way,
Yeah.
I'd probably keep him in that order. Moving on to running backs, we'll start off in Arizona. James Conner has been dealing with a heel injury. He was initially slated to play last week, was a late week downgrade. That's never a good sign. What do we know about James Conner's status?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that he technically could have suited up last week, and the words coming out of camp, it sounds like he was pretty close to practicing again this week. This is mostly a pain tolerance issue, and the reality is that a running back has to be mostly pain free when your heel is the injured tissue. So, what James Conner really needs is rest and to not have to put pressure on your heel. It sounds like he just needed another week, so I'm optimistic about his return for this coming game.
Yeah, we've talked about it already this year, but he's been a pleasant surprise at running back this year, just finding the end zone left and right. If he does miss again, I'm perfectly comfortable with starting Chase Edmonds. He was
Heck yeah.
RB6 in PPR scoring on the week last week. He was great. Seeing him finally get a full workload without James Conner in the game, he was um, definitely a great streaming option if you weren't planning to start him already. So keep an eye on Arizona to figure out which of those two will be the more viable back. But honestly, I'd be happy starting Edmonds in the flex if I am thin. And with as many people out with COVID as we have, he may end up being a good spot start for you, especially in a championship week.
Hmm.
Moving on to Detroit, Deandre Swift has been dealing with a shoulder injury. He still has not played yet. I think it's been 4 or 5 weeks that he's missed. Am I being a little
No,
generous with
you're right.
me?
It's
Only
been
been
about
3?
5 weeks.
Yeah. Do you feel like they should just go ahead and shut them down? The Lions, I mean, they won 2 games. They had a closer game this week.
I
Like, they
mean,
can't
if I
even
was the
tank right.
Lions, yeah, like if I was the Lions, I would be going in full tank mode. I don't know
Yeah.
where all of this competitive energy is coming from. But I mean, Swift has been out for about 5 weeks. And but it's looking like he will be back this coming week, or at least be healthy enough to come back this coming week. And I don't really think that any word coming out of camp is indicating that he would have any sort of performance limitation, if he does suit up. I think the real point of interest for a lot of fantasy managers would be, how Amon-Ra St. Brown performs, once there's another
Mhm.
target hog in this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be the big change to watch in Detroit is if Swift plays, but yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I was planning to talk about it later, but why not talk about it now? The dude's been
Why
great
not?
in the past few weeks. He's come on hot. Elijah Moore seemed like the rookie wide receiver that was coming in hot at the end of the season. Then with his injury, it was like Amon-Ra just picked up where he left off. Um, yeah, if for some reason Amon-Ra St. Brown is available on your waiver wire, pick him up yesterday. That's really all I can
That's
say about it. At running back in
excellent
Detroit,
strategy.
yeah, the next man up is Jamal Williams. He didn't have a great week last week, but if Swift is out, I would expect him to basically work as the bell cow and should have a better week than he did last week, but not somebody that I'm super relying on as a RB1 or 2 candidate. Definitely a more of a flex option for me.
Yeah.
Um, Kareem Hunt, he was on the COVID list, but also had an ankle injury. What can you tell us about his ankle injury and his outlook moving forward?
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that he's finally back off the COVID list, but it's been such a gray issue. I would want to check again, but what I know for sure is that he has not been practicing at all this week because of that ankle injury. And these injuries, they really just need time to heal before battering it with sport activity. So, I'm not expecting Hunt to be back this week, and his next week, I think realistically is in jeopardy as well.
Yeah, not super optimistic about him either. Nick Chubb is really the only running back that I'm interested in Cleveland, unless Hunt is able to be full go. Jacksonville, gosh,
Well,
just a heartbreaking. Um, they can't catch a break. It's rough. James Robinson suffered an Achilles tear this week. We all know that means his season's done. That's 2 running backs now with a ruptured Achilles in Jacksonville. A little bit different question. Obviously, we don't really need to talk too much about his prognosis, but at this point, who do you prefer more in Dynasty? Are you still looking at James Robinson as the RB1? Or are we looking at like a 1-2 situation with him and ETN or an AB
yeah,
situation rather?
You know, James Robinson's story is such a bummer because it really felt like with Urban Meyer gone, we were going to be seeing finally the 2020 J Rob back on the field. But, with this massive injury, we actually have a decent amount of data on, players returning from Achilles tears and the undrafted free agents like James Robinson. They don't have a great chance at returning from their starting jobs, and they don't have a great track record of playing well, if they do make it back to the field. So, anything is possible, especially with the new head coach coming in. It's very possible that they just favor James Robinson's running style. But I think that he's a bad bet at this point. So I'd prefer Travis Etienne, even without seeing him in action this year.
Yeah, totally makes sense. The draft capital's there. They picked him up to be the man. I don't think you would spend a first round draft pick on a running back and not expect him to get a good amount of runs. So I think they'll look to him first. He'll be ready to play sooner, obviously, because his injury was suffered in the preseason. But I mean, just a bummer. It's just tough to see.
All of
You hate it.
Jacksonville
Yeah,
is a bummer.
Jacksonville is just a bummer. I hope they end up finding a good coach this offseason
Dark
and
cloud.
starting to get stuff moving in the right direction. In the meantime, next man up there, flip a coin between Carlos Hyde and Dare Agambawale. I mean,
Oof.
Dare had a pretty good week this week, but I don't know that he'll continue that. He's not somebody that I'm looking at like, yes, I'm really excited to have him in my lineup in my championship matchup, but he could end up being a flex play that has really good upside if he replicates last week.
Yeah, I think between the two, it should be Dare. I mean, my the narrative that I have in my head is just that Urban Meyer had a track record and good history with Carlos Hyde, so he brought
Yep.
him in. but Dare should be the guy now that Urban's gone. So I mean, we'll see. And neither, like you said, are really that spectacular.
Yeah.
But if you have to,
Carlos Hyde was like Urban's ex that he just keeps going back to and just can't give it up.
bad, bad.
That's probably a really bad analogy for Urban Meyer right now. But anyways, moving on to Kansas City. Clyde Edwards-Helaire came out with a shoulder injury this week. What does that mean for him and his status in the championship this week?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it originally listed as, maybe a clavicle injury, and now folks are calling it a shoulder injury. They're not putting him on IR, which, I think more realistically indicates maybe an AC or an SC sprain, which are just, the ligaments on either side of the clavicle. So, for this type of thing, and given the fact that he's not going on IR, I'm expecting a 2 week recovery time. He may be back for week 18, but realistically, if I were the team and I knew that I was making the playoffs, I would try and hold him out, until the playoffs.
Yeah. For the next man up in Kansas City, here's a fun one for you. You ready? Darrell Williams had a higher snap percentage at 42% than Derek Gore at 28%, but Derek Gore outtouched him and had more fantasy
Derek Gore
points.
looked good.
Yep, 28% of the snaps, but more touches, more fantasy points than Darrell Williams. So if you're about volume as far as touches, then it's Derek Gore. But I don't know what to expect. It was almost half of the snap percentage. I don't know if it's just they put Darrell Williams into pass block, and I didn't watch the game, so I can't tell you. But looking at those numbers, I would say Darrell Williams is probably in for more of the pass protection kind of stuff. But
Mm,
I don't know. I don't know what to do with that backfield. I don't know that I can trust it.
good luck.
If I had to pick one, I would pick Darrell Williams because he's had the experience. He's looked better this year season long, but you never know. As the season goes on, sometimes a coach will decide they like somebody else. We
Mhm.
shall see. Los Angeles Rams, Darrell Henderson has a knee sprain. Previously, he had a quad strain. Do you think that there's maybe a little possible connection between these two?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, whenever we hear about a soft tissue injury, you have to think, oh boy, because, if you come back too soon from those types of injuries, then the next level of, what would be a mechanical failure of the anatomy is a breakdown of the non-active tissue, like ligaments, like labrum, et cetera. So, it is very possible that that's what happened here. We don't know for sure, but,
Sure.
I think it's notable. But at any rate, I think that Henderson is going to need at least 3 weeks of recovery. And the cavalry is on its way with Akers returning from IR. So we'll see what they do when the backfield gets a little bit more crowded.
Yeah, Sony Michelle. I mean, he was RB8 in PPR this week. He was great. Definitely a
Not
streaming
bad.
option that I would much rather start than somebody like Jamal Williams or Dare. And yeah, I like that you brought up Cam Akers. I don't know that we'll see him during the fantasy season. He may be able to play during the playoffs, but I think it was a really classy move by the Rams. I got to give a shout out to their front office. They went ahead and activated him and designated him to return so that he would be able to qualify a year of service for the pension qualifications for the NFL. They're expecting him to play in the NFL playoffs, but for the fantasy playoffs, not so sure that we'll have him. So shout out to the Rams for being quality people and trying to help out Cam Akers in the future. All righty. Philadelphia, Miles Sanders. I feel like he's been on and off and healthy and
Mm.
hurt and back just all over the place. This time it's not soft tissue, though. He's got a broken hand. So can we expect him to play through this? Do we know yet?
I really wouldn't expect that. I mean, like we talked about with Andy Dalton, these things can be so fickle, so particular, really dangerous, to Miles Sanders' health as a person. So, I don't think that this is something that you really should rush back. I'm not optimistic about his return for the regular season.
Yeah, and I'm not optimistic about that backfield. I mean, it's pretty much 50-50 between Boston Scott and Jordan Howard. If one of them finds
Yikes.
the end zone, they're going to have good upside. They may be a solid DFS play for cheap, but not somebody I really want to rely on in the championship. I know I sound like a broken record saying that, but you got to be choosy this far into the season.
It's about that time of year. Yeah.
It is Elijah Mitchell in San Francisco. He's been kind of all over the place. Started out with a concussion and a knee injury together. He's finally cleared concussion protocol, but what's up with the knee? Last I heard was game time decision. What do we think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of optimism coming out of his camp about his availability for this week. It is tough to gauge, when there are two injuries to track since they don't necessarily recover coinciding at convenient times. But I think that at this point, he's about 3 to 4 weeks out. So that's sort of the timetable for most mild to moderate injuries to reach that point of, maybe he's questionable, maybe he's going to be a game time decision. So I think that the reports coming out of camp are valid. He didn't practice at all last week, but if he puts together some limited practices this week, I think he has a legitimate chance of suiting up this Sunday. And if he does, then I'd fire him up in my lineup without hesitation.
Yeah, absolutely. He's looked great when he's played. If he's ready to go, I'm definitely excited to start him. But if not, Jeff Wilson's a pretty good option in your flex spot if you need a running back. Even with Trey Sermon being activated off the IR, he does not worry me. Jeff Wilson had a great week this week with him active. So fire up Jeff Wilson if you need a running back. I'm not afraid to start him for sure. Tampa Bay, Leonard Fournette out with a hamstring injury. He's now been put on IR. How do you feel about Rojo? You think it's finally Rojo time?
No, I really don't know. I mean, I think that there's been a lot of fluff coming out of their front office, but it's pretty clear to me that they don't trust him with a legitimate workload.
Yeah, I mean, he was RB12 last week, but they were up handily as the game drove on. They were just kind of feeding him touches to run the clock down.
Yeah,
I don't really see him being a super high value, but if you need a decent floor, somebody that's going to get good volume, he's a good option. He may end up finding the end zone and prove us both wrong, but not somebody I'm looking at. Like, if I need a home run, I'm going to start him. I would definitely go with somebody like Elijah Mitchell and rely
yeah,
on them to be a more of a home run threat for you.
yeah.
That does it for the running backs and injury news for us outside of COVID people, but just a few guys to keep an eye on if you're surfing the waiver wire and you're desperate this week. Justin Jackson in Los Angeles. If Austin Eckler can't clear protocols, Justin Jackson was RB1 in PPR scoring this week. He was electric, scored multiple touchdowns, got a ton of touches. I think he had double digit receptions. He was everywhere, put up huge numbers. Now, obviously, I don't expect him to put up nearly 40 PPR points again, but definitely somebody that I would be comfortable with starting. They showed that he can handle the volume and they're not scared to give him the ball. Rex Burkhead was RB3 in Houston this week. I mean, there's
Awesome.
options out there. Don't be afraid to check on the waiver wire, look at matchups, and listen to practice reports this week, especially at the positions like RB and wide receiver. They're really deep, but you can find value. Alrighty. Speaking of wide receivers, there's only a few big time injuries. A lot of the people that were out this week, it was COVID stuff. But kicking it off, Arizona, two of their top four options, DeAndre Hopkins and Rondale Moore, both out last week. Obviously, D Hop's out for the rest of the regular season. He may be able to come back in the playoffs, but Rondale Moore, do we think he'll be back on the field anytime soon?
Yeah, I mean, he missed most of last week's practice because of his ankle injury. And, we've talked about these kinds of injuries on the show already. And so we know that their return to play outcomes can be very variable depending on the severity, which we just don't know. Last week, he was listed as questionable, but he didn't play. I think that they're already describing him as a game time decision this week, which I think actually, comes with some optimism. I think he's close. He's not someone that I would really be eager to have him suit up so I can fire him up on my championship roster. But as an Arizona fan, if you just have a love for the game, then you obviously want him out there as a playmaker in the absence of D Hop. But at this point, I'd call him 50-50 for this week.
Yeah, playoff seeding is certainly in play for Arizona right now, so they hope to get Rondale Moore back, but I'm not excited about him for fantasy purposes yet.
No,
Um, Next man up here, AJ Green or Christian Kirk? Who do you prefer if you had to pick between the two?
I think Christian Kirk has a better
Yeah.
ceiling. I mean, he could hit the home run, any game. He just isn't that consistent. But if you're looking for that, if you need that in your flex, do it.
Yeah, anytime D Hop's been out, it's kind of been like pick an option. None of them have been stellar. None of them got the bulk of his targets. I feel like it's pretty well spread out. If I'm picking somebody in this offense that I really like, it's one of the running backs, to be honest, outside of Kyler Murray, of course. Um, I don't know that I really trust either of them, but if I got to pick one, I agree. It's Christian Kirk. Tampa Bay also dealing with two wide receivers out, but these two are both very fantasy relevant. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, both with injuries. Godwin, we know, has a torn ACL, so he will be out for the rest of this season and probably pushing it to be back before the beginning of next year, depending on how his recovery goes. But the one I want to talk about, because he could potentially be back this year, is Mike Evans. kind of a watch and wait deal, or can we go ahead and rule him out?
I would definitely consider him a watch and wait. I'm considering him week to week, a true 50-50. And, if he's suiting up, if he's playing, then I'm starting him in my championship lineups because I think the stat that I saw was that Antonio Brown had some kind of absurd target share last week.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I think it was bananas. So, I think Tom Brady's going to be looking for some kind of diversity in his target outlet this coming week.
Yeah, obviously they still got Gronk there, but AB was peppered with targets last week. I think he pretty much took over the Chris Godwin target volume role there. Yeah, I totally agree. If Evans is cleared to play and they talk about like he's not going to have any limitations, then I'm happy starting him. And I'm happy to be wrong if they end up saying, "Oh yeah, he's good to go," and then he ends up just being a big old decoy out there. You can't bench that talent. If a couple weeks ago, if we would have told you, yeah, Dalvin Cook's going to have a limited workload and go ahead and bench him, you'd have missed out on like the top scoring RB that week. So,
Exactly.
and Mike
Yeah.
Evans has that upside. It's certainly possible in that offense, especially without Chris Godwin. So if he's ready, start him. Otherwise, it's AB for me. I don't really have much interest in Tyler Johnson. Maybe Gronk gets a bump, gets some
Yeah,
more
it's
in
sad
red
about
zone
Tyler Johnson.
targets.
He's had plenty of opportunities this year and he just hasn't stepped up.
Yeah. Hopefully, getting another offseason under his belt, a regular offseason, hopefully
Yeah.
this year.
One
We'll
more.
see. He can kind of string it together there. All righty. Our last team we're going to talk about with wide receivers, the New York Giants. They have been our darling on this show, it seems like that wide receiver room. But the
DFS,
big
they
one,
keep us in business.
something like that. Um, the big one here, Sterling Shepard suffered an Achilles tear this week. Again, you just hate to see it, especially for somebody who's seemed to bounce back and forth this season on and off the injury report.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
this one's pretty gnarly. Unfortunately, I think this will be a real hamper on his production going forward in his career. I don't really have much to add to this one. It's just been a tough year for this guy, and I think that his value is just going to keep sinking.
Yeah. If he's in Dynasty, I mean, I don't feel like you could probably trade him for much right now. But if you've got somebody in your league that's optimistic for his future or just a big Sterling Shepard fan, probably not a bad idea to try to move him. Darius Slayton's probably going to be the next man up here, but there's just really
Bleh.
nobody in this offense that I'm excited about. With that being
I
said, go get Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah,
Yeah, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But other notable wide receiver candidates, KJ Osborne has been great. Even with Adam Thielen coming back this week, KJ Osborne had a good week, scored a touchdown. I'm comfortable starting him in the flex if I need a receiver option. And Josh Palmer in LA had a good week this week out of the rookie.
for sure. KJ looks good out there, and
Yeah.
for the Giants, I think I heard that the coach speak is something to the tune of both Fromm and Glennon are going to get work. Um, So that I think that
Wonderful.
just says don't even watch that game.
Yeah. Avoid, avoid, avoid,
Yeah.
avoid. Maybe Evan Ingram if you're desperate at tight end. Other than that, I just he scored a touchdown last week late after Glennon came in, but that was pretty much the lone bright spot for the Giants.
They're doing a
Um,
better job at tanking than, the Lions are.
they sure are. I wonder if they can
Yeah.
surpass them. I don't know what their record is off the top of my head, but what a wild end to the year for them. Alrighty. Moving on to the last position group, our tight ends. Pretty short list here, thankfully. We already talked about Detroit and why Amon-Ra St. Brown's value has been so great. Here we are, TJ Hawkinson still on the list with a hand injury. Is there any update on his status?
Yeah, I mean, Hawkinson, I think, posted on Instagram that he's gonna be out for the season having thumb surgery. So, this won't affect him in 2022. In the meantime, it remains the Amon-Ra and potentially, Swift show in Detroit.
Yeah, that's obviously tough news for Detroit, but hopefully it'll help him figure out how to tank. Just one more thing about Amon-Ra St. Brown, since I'm just so excited about him today. Over the past 3 weeks, you ready for this? 25 receptions, 254 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That ain't too shabby. He's gone over
That's
19
bananas.
PPR points every single week. Definitely firing him up this week if I have him in a lineup. Yes. Alrighty. Last player we're going to talk about tonight, Darren Waller in Las Vegas. Been dealing with a knee injury. Do we think he'll be back?
You know, like this guy just refuses to play. I've called him week to week, I think for like 3 weeks now. And frankly, the difficult thing about what they're calling an IT band issue is that IT bands just don't knock you out like this. So it's
No.
really difficult to understand, what exactly is happening with him. for all of us in championship games with Waller on our rosters, all we can do is put on a brave face at this point, because what the heck is happening? None of us know. But, if he does suit up, then you're starting him. That's the bottom line.
Yep. If he suits up, start him. His fill-in will be Foster Moreau, not somebody I want to play, not even really looking to put him in a DFS lineup. And I'm crossing my fingers and toes. Maybe it's finally going to be Bryan Edwards' time to shine. Maybe he's finally going to crack through.
This is the week.
If he doesn't do it this week, I'm just going to go ahead and call it. I think he might be the second coming of N'Keal Harry. And that breaks my heart to say, because I was really excited about both of them coming out of college.
All right.
Ugh. That honestly just hurt to say that. Well, that kind of does it for us on injury news. You feel like we left anybody out? Anybody you want to talk about?
I think we should talk about Amon-Ra a little more.
Yeah, you think so? He's healthy,
No,
and that's
no,
big
no.
this week.
No, good show.
Yeah, I think that pretty much does it for us in the injury news. Of course, if you have any questions or if you think we left somebody off the list and you want to hear about them, shoot us a tweet, shoot us a message on Twitter. You can find me at @kallen_4 on Twitter. You can find Eric. Eric, where can we find you, sir?
All right. I am the Nighthawk PT. You can find me on Twitter at @FF_Nighthawk.
Thank you, sir. And of course, we have to give a big shout out to John C for all of our intro and outro music. You can find him on his email, jonseemusic@gmail.com. That's JONSEE music@gmail.com. There's no H in that, John. Much like there is no TJH Hawkinson in Detroit anymore. So pick up Amon-Ra St. Brown if you haven't already. Sorry, I had something in my throat. Well, that does it for us this week. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry I just murdered your ears and your speakers. Bill them to Matthew Walters AT. Matthew, he's in Las Vegas this week. Put it all on red for us, buddy. We'll get you back next week. Next week's going to be a fun show. We're going to close out the season. We're going to have our big trivia finale, see if Eric can make the comeback. But that does it for us. Have a great week. Best of luck in your championships. Tweet at us if you need some last-minute advice. We are happy to help. And don't forget that the best ability is availability. Peace.
Bye.